Okay, so welcome everybody to this week's call. My name is Jackie Boyle and I live in Sydney, Australia. And I have the honour of being able to host Dr. Joseph Ahrens, a dual nominated Nobel Prize scientist, on a topic today that I think that if you haven't got somebody in your family, I'm sure there's one of your friends or somebody that you do know that possibly has the symptoms of cholesterol. So it's going to be a really interesting presentation today, and I look forward to learning. I've always been a student of life. So how are you, Dr. Ahrens, today?
I'm doing great today. It's getting here at sunset in Central Florida. I'm glad to be here, and I'm very glad people have joined us for this important topic.
Yeah, before we get started, Dr. Ahrens, can I just ask you, so you can let people know, how important is it for us to be able to have the pleasure, if somebody has honoured us to share their testimonial with us, how important is that for us when we can try and spread that word into the globe from your point of view?
Well, data is great, technical data is great, but it's where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. And really what happens is you understand the data, and then somebody gives their personal testimony. It becomes alive to people and they understand it. They might not understand triglycerides and inflammation and certain things, but they do understand people's testimony where they said, this is what happened to me. This is what happened to my mother. And they can really identify with that. It's part of the educational process. Data without testimonies is really cold and not very useful. And likewise, testimonies without data are just hearsay, but put them together, very powerful.
Yeah, so, if you want to share, because I know it's an emotional, personal thing to do so, we'd be really honoured if you would consider doing that so we can help others globally with this amazing product. So today, Dr. Ahrens, we're talking about cholesterol. So it's a bit of a passion of yours too, because it all sits within, what you've been researching all of your life too, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a passion of mine. I want to say the first passion of mine, outside of friends and loved ones, is the truth. There's so much in any industry you choose, but particularly biology. There's a lot of things that are not true because you can easily pull the wool over people's eyes unless they have a master's or a doctorate or some further training in the sciences. It is very difficult. And statistics can make, as we'll learn tonight, statistics can say anything you want them to say. Do you know that 87% of statistics are made up on the spot? Yeah, I just made that up. So we'll look at that later on. But the truth and what I would like this site to, and this weekly meeting coupled with the Facebook and our web pages, of which is Dr. Joseph Ahrens, just so it's easily identifiable. I want it to be a source of truth, and I can be challenged by anyone. I'll come back with data and not just an opinion. So I want there to be truth, and I want people to come here, not to just hear about Emulin. Emulin, we started this group to talk about Emulin and to let there be less confusion on the different products, what's the difference between C and M, etc. But really, I want it to cover everything: food, exercise, what's the truth about COVID. We could even cover that one evening, and we'll just come back with data, and I'll give you my educated guess. So this is where I want people to come for a home. You hear about a diet, all types of diets, Cornish diet, and keto diet. Send us a question and we'll open up. We'll have a night on just different diets, and I'll tell you what it works or not. So this is what this is for, and I'm glad people are here, and I hope they're here to hear the truth.
Very accurate and very much.
Sorry, Dr. Ahrens. Okay, well, let's get started, shall we? We'll get this screen shared. We'll open this up, and just a second, we'll open that right up.
Well, I've put together a few slides here, so people don't have to just stare at my ugly mug the whole time, but we're going to talk about cholesterol. Forget cholesterol killing you. We're going to kill cholesterol, kill the myth. Next. So let's start out. Everyone's heard about cholesterol. I think everyone has. What is cholesterol? Well, it's just another natural molecule in your body. It happens to be a piece of fat, just like we talked about recently, a piece of fat, but it's hooked to a protein. That means it's called a lipoprotein. Lipo, lipids, lipo, that means fat. A fat molecule. So it is in the class of fats. Usually they don't classify it. It is a protein, but it's classified as one of the fats. It's actually kind of waxy. You remember the only difference between an oil and a fat is the oil is liquid at room temperature. And if you go even further than that, you have wax. And wax has got some long chains on it, and it's even more solid, if you will, and it's still slippery than a regular fat molecule. So it's a wax. It's a waxy fat. It's essential for your body. All cholesterol is essential for your body. Don't aim to get rid of your cholesterol. All cholesterol is essential to your body. What's it good for? Well, it helps your body make body tissues. Your tissues, whatever they are, liver, doesn't matter what it is, stomach. As we regenerate these organs in our body, cholesterol is part of that transport process that helps your heart rebuild itself. It also is an essential part of hormones like testosterone. You could not make estrogen and testosterone without cholesterol. They're part of that process. It also makes bile, so it's necessary for digestion. Bile, if you don't know, is a natural chemical in your body that digests fats. So the purpose of bile is to digest fats, and you manufacture bile using this lipoprotein, cholesterol. The brain. Wow, if you took your brain and put it in a blender, and if you could still punch the buttons on the blender, you'd find out it's around 25% cholesterol. Cholesterol is what makes up all the coverings of your nerves and the sheath that surrounds your brain and all the inside parts. It's like an insulation. It's absolutely necessary to have cholesterol, high density and low density, for your brain. And there are several types of cholesterol, but the main ones we're going to talk about tonight, and the ones that really are the most important to you, are the low density cholesterol and the high density cholesterol. And I think everyone now understands that. You go in, you get a blood test, and they tell you what your glucose levels are, your fasting glucose, and they'll tell you how much total cholesterol you got, and they'll tell you what's the low density and what's the high density. Next. So, what's the problem then? Well, the problem was started around in the 60s, late 50s, mid 60s. We had a report that you heard of on one of my last talks. Next. It says Ansel Keys 7-country study. This is the original work right here. This is a published paper, lipoprotein profile, its value and prediction. So lipoprotein, we just talked about that, means cholesterol. And this paper went on to say that saturated fats and cholesterol, HDL and LDL, but mostly speaking about HDL and total cholesterol, they had found an association between high levels of cholesterol and mortality, coronary heart attacks, and hardening their arteries and deaths. And so he said, we got all these deaths, and every time we see all these deaths, people have a lot of cholesterol in their body. Same thing. Last week we talked about fats. Well, now he's harping on cholesterol. And this was really, I want to say, it was good in that it was one of the very first works. It's called a seminal work to try to study this, but he did have a problem. Next. This guy, bless his heart, he actually looked at 21 countries, and he only used 7 of them. And the 7 of them he chose to fit his study. If he had used all 21 countries in this study, he would have first of all found no correlation. And this guy was aiming to be president of the American Heart Association, and he did become president of the American Heart Association, and he guided its policies for several years. And now I encourage you to go to Wikipedia and just look 7-country study. And this is what comes up. This is a shot right off of Wikipedia. And it talks about this study and what the controversy is. And now we find out that there's not much correlation here. It did kick the ball off and rolling and get in research, but it was actually, as far as data is concerned, it was useless. But this started people saying cholesterol is bad. Okay, next. So what we had is avoid cholesterol. That was the original medical advice, and there was no distinction between the high density and the low density. Avoid cholesterol. Next. And by the way, cholesterol just comes from animals. It doesn't come from plants. So you said avoid shellfish, very high in cholesterol. Next. Avoid meat of all kinds. Meat, avoid meat. Next. Avoid dairy, because these are animal products. High cholesterol in milk and many of these cheeses. Next. Avoid eggs. Oh, great egg. Avoid eggs. Next. Eggs. Well, that's right, because back here when this study was put out, the American Heart Association with Dr. Keyes joined about that same time. They said, do not eat more than 3 a week. And everybody remembers that, probably that's on this call, if they're, like an ancient guy like me or not, but you remember eggs are bad for you. They have cholesterol in them, and don't eat any more than 3 a week. Well, why didn't they just ban them? Well, because the poultry industry, the egg industry is real big, and they lobbied the American Heart Association to let them say, just don't eat more than 3 a week. Well, most people don't eat more than that a week, but don't eat more than 3 a week. But all of a sudden in 2015, 5 or 6 years ago, the US National Institute of Health dropped the restriction. Well, what happened? Well, in the meantime, they found out that there is such thing as HDL and LDL. And they said, it's the LDL that clogs arteries, and the HDL removes that clog and takes it back to the liver. So eggs have both HDL and LDL in them. Surprisingly, so does meat. So they said now, okay, you can go ahead and eat eggs, because even though eggs have LDL, which clogs arteries, the HDL is there that removes the LDL. It's just further confusion. So let's get to the bottom of it. Next. Here's what the authorities say right now. So this we've talked about the American Heart Association and the Center for Disease Control. I'm in the US, so I'm all focused on these organizations, but there is an identical organization in Australia and Europe for these same things. There's the European Center for Disease Control, and there's WebMD. I think everybody gets on WebMD, and they all say LDL is a bad cholesterol. It collects in the walls of your blood vessels, raising your chance of health problems like heart attacks, hardening of the arteries. Everywhere you go, it says bad, 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 bad. Next. Well, what's the real picture here? Well, it does clog your arteries. Let me say that again. Cholesterol, low density cholesterol, will end up clogging your arteries. Next. Here in 2019, the Lancet, this is the premier scientific medical publication in the UK, the Lancet. It's similar to the Journal of American Medical Association. This is a long-term study. It's like 50 years to do this study. And it started back when the 7-country report was released. And so this got them on the ball. It's taken them 50 years to put this together, 2019. And so what is the headline here? This is a scientifically published paper, and it says it's the first long-term estimates suggest a link between cholesterol levels and risk of heart disease and stroke. So there you have it, folks. That's the headline. In 2019, this is really recent. There looks to be a link between cholesterol levels and risk of heart disease. And you're going to see that, and have seen it in the papers, because, Most writers are not very scientifically astute, and medical doctors have heard there's bad cholesterol, bad cholesterol, bad cholesterol. It clogs your arteries. We got to lower it. And then there's drug companies that come along and say, I've got a drug to lower it. So they just give you the drug to try to lower your cholesterol. And you'll go into a doctor today and he'll say, yeah, look, here is the first long-term study. And it says there's a link between cholesterol and heart disease. What does this paper really say if you dig down into it? Next. It actually says that high LDL is correlated to heart events. If you have high cholesterol, you have a 16% greater chance of a heart event or death, heart attack, clogged arteries. If, okay, let me say that again. If you also have at least two of the following. You got to have two of these following for this to be true. If you smoke, if you're obese, if you have diabetes, if you have high blood pressure, if you're sedentary, if you're taking high blood pressure medication. So you have to have two of these risk factors and high cholesterol for there to be this 16% increased risk of a heart attack. What happens if you don't have these two? What if you just have one? What if you don't have any? What if you don't smoke? What if you don't have any? There's no correlation. There's no correlation between elevated cholesterol and heart events unless you have additional two of these situations. Next. So here's Dwight Lundell. Pretty good looking guy, isn't he? He's about my age. Well, I know him. I'm almost a friend with him. I think I am a friend, but I know Dwight Lundell. I've met with him. I've talked to him. And let's see what he says. Who is he and what does he say? Next. Dr. Dwight Lundell. You know, you need to remember that name, Dr. Dwight Lundell. And there's many people on this call tonight that know him. He's a former president of the College of Cardiac Surgeons. That means there's a group of cardiac surgeons that have they're not affiliated with hospitals. They just all of the surgeons join this college, it's called, and he was the president. He's done over 5,000 open heart surgeries. Before he quit this business of doing heart surgeries, he was the leading heart surgeon in the world. He personally has done 5,000 heart surgeries, and he keeps opening these hearts up, looking at them, trying to declog them, patch them. You all know that type of word. You patch them, put a new piece of artery in there, you scrape them out. And all of a sudden, he said, wait a second. He actually told me this. I had a eureka moment. Why is this cholesterol there? And he said, I could see clearly with my own eyes. I did not need any chemical analysis or microscopes. I could see that this cholesterol was sitting on top of damaged arteries. They were inflamed, and the cholesterol was there as a bandage. The underlying culprit is inflammation, not cholesterol. He said that was my eureka moment. And he went out and told everybody he could about it. And he says right now, to this very day, I'm on a personal crusade to expose the lies peddled to the American people regarding heart disease, including those pharmaceutical television ads that everybody sees all evening, and the misinformation given to them by their doctors. The problem is inflammation. It's got nothing to do with cholesterol. Cholesterol is there because there's inflammation. It's a bandage. Well, what do you think that the industry did for that? Well, they basically shut him down and ran him out, and it got so difficult for him to work with his fellow doctors. He's decided to go off and do these consultings like this. He says, I'm on a personal crusade, and he has appearances all over the world now. And he's saying all this stuff is a bunch of lies. Next. So here it is. Let's recap that. There's an underlying health issue that leads to injury, that leads to inflammation, that leads to cholesterol trying to repair that problem, and that leads to the blockage. You don't just scrape the blockage off, patch them up, and go on. You got to find out what the issue is causing the inflammation. Next. Well, he's not alone. Here's Stephen Gundry, and maybe you don't know him, but you've probably seen his ads on every one of your Google trips there. He's got a really big institution going on now where he is trying to spread his word at a little more of a commercial avenue. Next. So Stephen Gundry, he was also a cardiac surgeon, but he also did a lot of whole heart transplants. He was the leading heart transplant specialist in children and infants until a couple of years ago. He's published over 300 scientific papers. That means his colleagues have accepted his papers 300 times. And he was head and still is affiliated with the surgical unit of Loma Linda University, a pretty prestigious university. He also had a eureka moment. He said, why are these problems with his heart issues in children? They shouldn't even be having any issues. It's not, they can't have clogged arteries and heart failure as a child unless, they have some kind of genetic abnormality. And he saw that he personally witnessed recovery of these patients with just changing the diet. So he said, he's all about nutrition. And he said, you know what? We can change these people's diet, get rid of the inflammation, and they should heal. And they did. So he's convinced that the issue is lectins in the diet. Now, lectins are natural poisons that are in things such as soybeans. So his mission now is to tell you to avoid lectins and to increase your flavonoid intake. Does that sound familiar? So he's all about get good flavonoids and decrease the lectins. And he has actually developed a line of supplements. He even has a line of olive oil that is heavy in flavonoids. I personally think it tastes disgusting. I've tried it. Nevertheless, he is right on track. He's on track. Increase your flavonoids. And yes, I do believe you should avoid lectins. And I personally think you should avoid tofu. Next. So we've got these two major, and they're not, there's a lot of them, but those are the two big top guns. We had a paper then come along in 2011 from Texas A&M University. And they said, you know what? Bad cholesterol is not as bad as people think. They did a study and found out, wait, let's just forget all this stuff, what the Ansel told us, what with the 7-country study. Let's just forget all that and go back to basics. And they did their own study of lipoproteins, the low density LDL. And here's what their conclusions were. Next. So they said that, when you do, we put some people on a heavy exercise regimen and it increased their muscle mass, but they also had high levels of LDL cholesterol. It was a very unexpected result and one that really surprised us. They were taking people and make them more healthy with increased muscle mass, but it raised their LDL cholesterol. They found out you actually need a certain amount of LDL cholesterol to gain more muscle mass, which is higher than the current recommended LDL concentration. Next. Here's their further conclusions. It says, we are taught that, so these guys are doctors, they're medical doctors. We are taught that LDL is bad because it builds up in the walls of arteries, it causes slowing of the blood, and it leads to heart disease, like blocked arteries. The bottom line is that bad cholesterol is serving as a warning that something is wrong and we need to find out what it is. Is it smoking? Is it diet? Is it lack of exercise? Is that why this person's cholesterol is too high? He's following in line with these other two doctors. They've already said it, but now here's another paper that says LDL cholesterol is a warning. It's not the problem. Next. So here's Height et al. I told you about this on a previous discussion. So they've taken all of these things we've heard about tonight and the ones we heard about previously, and they said, we need to relook at these dietary guidelines because there's contradictory evidence. The data doesn't make any sense. We're still listening to this stuff out of the 1960s, and we should know better. And this was in 2010. Go ahead. Next. And that's what I just told you. They said there's current recommendations. There's no basis in science. There's no evidence that the increase in carbohydrates and decrease of fats leads to better health. And they strongly advise to reevaluate how guidelines are determined, which means they're actually saying that we should stop the lobbies, the farming lobby, which, you know, I love farmers, but the big farming lobbies, the wheat people, the soybean people, the corn people, they are pushing to eat more carbohydrates and take drugs. Next. In 2020, okay, just last year, there was a news story on the BBC that probably none of you heard about. It didn't make any type of headlines, but it was on the BBC. So this is the government channel in the UK. And it said researchers have not definitively linked consumption of cholesterol to an increased risk of cardiovascular disease. As a result, the US and UK dietary guidelines no longer have a cholesterol restriction. Did any of you know that? Did anyone toot a horn and come out and say, hey, there's no longer any cholesterol restrictions because there's no link? No, none of you heard that. This was never a headline, except that BBC did dig it up and find it. There's no currently any type of recommendation or guideline for dietary cholesterol restrictions because there's no linkage there. Next. And here we have Cleveland Clinic. So this is probably top, you can argue that it's the top hospital clinic in the United States, maybe the world. Cleveland Clinic, Johns Hopkins, Sloan Kettering. These are our top hospitals. In 2021, this means right now, they came out and said, why you should no longer worry about cholesterol in food. Next. So let's go next. And so here's a paper that said particularly what I've been harping on for years of my life: high carbs raise LDL cholesterol. So it is the high carbs that raise the bad, so-called bad cholesterol in your diet. It's not animal products. It's not saturated fat, butter, cheese, milk. It's not meat. It's not eggs. And you just heard that the UK and the US have reduced any recommendation about that because they cannot find any link. And here, this paper is saying, well, there is a link, but it is from carbohydrates. Next. So here's the bottom line here. I'll recap all of this, and you'll be able to see this online so you can go over it yourself. Are you worried about high cholesterol? Well, the culprit is inflammation. It's not low density lipoprotein. Saturated fats, they actually will increase HDL and LDL, so don't worry about that. High refined carbs are what increase your LDL. If you're trying to lower your cholesterol, you need to stay away from refined carbs and don't worry about the other stuff. But this is the important one. There is no link between high LDL alone. Unless you're smoking, you're obese, you're gambling and playing cards and running around loose and wild. Unless you're doing those things, there's no link between high cholesterol alone and heart events. And dietary cholesterol itself, even if you're worried about it, even has little effect on blood cholesterol. Next. Well, I'm through.
Okay, and I think you did a very good job. So I'm not, and I know I learned a lot when we were looking at this presentation. So, and I'm sure other people on this call have too, Dr. Ahrens. So I want people to stay on the call if you can, but I would like to finish the call so we've got a clean recording. So thank you so much for your knowledge and for sharing that with us. We truly do appreciate what you bring to the table. And, as we said, it's not product driven. It is really about, it obviously assists you and supports you to manage these symptoms, but we are really looking at, particular areas like killing the myth of cholesterol and bad fats in diet. So I really do thank you, Dr. Ahrens. Is there anything that you'd like to finish off with today?
Well, don't run out and say, Dr. Ahrens told me I don't worry about anything. First of all, I'm nobody's physician here. I can't legally be your physician. What I do is I will find out the truth. I will read the paper myself. I've done my own research. Some of it, as you all know, I do some research. I talk with people like Dr. Lindell, and I get the truth and I bring it to you. It's up to you to take care of your own health and manage your own health, make your own decisions. And this here is data that you can trust. Take that and add it into your health management. If you're trying to reduce your cholesterol, do it. I would not do it with drugs. I would do it naturally. There's a way to do that. By one of them is you might be able to take some inulin. You can take some grapefruit. Grapefruit has got a bad rep because, if you do like it, if you don't like it, I'm sorry, but it's got a bad rep because it has a drug interaction. Which drug does it have an interaction with? Lipitor, the one that you take to lower your cholesterol. I actually wrote a book on this in 2004. And I said, why are you taking Lipitor? You ought to just take grapefruit. Grapefruit itself will lower your cholesterol. Actually, several things will. Oatmeal will. Many complex pectins will do it. The good carbohydrates will do it. There's many ways to lower your cholesterol. Drugs is the last result. But I say, unless you are just over the top, already got clogged arteries, don't worry about it. And find out what's your problem. Get rid of the underlying health issue and your blockages will go away.
So really we need to have a look at what our Ferraris are, or our Maseratis are, or the Porsche, and that's our body, and we need to really consider what we are deciding to fuel our body with, so that we are actually maximizing what we choose to eat so that our health is going to benefit from it. So Dr. Ahrens, I want to thank you so much because I know you're a very busy man, and on behalf of all of us, we always appreciate the knowledge that you do bring to us, and I'm very grateful for it. So thank you so much.
Thank you.